The Danny Thomas Hour, usually seen at this time, will not be presented tonight so that we may bring you the following special program.
Word Balloon is brought to you by the League of Word Balloon Listeners. It's been called one of the top 3 real Comic-Cons in the USA. August 16th through the 18th. Discover Terrificon as it returns to the Mohegan Sun Expo Center in Uncasville, Connecticut. Terrificon showrunner Mitch Halleck has assembled his biggest and best comic creator guest list to date. Jim Lee, Scotty Young, Mark Waid, Adam Hughes, Jason Aaron, Charles Soule, Scott Snyder, Greg Capullo, Brian Azzarello, alongside legends like Chris Claremont, Jerry Ordway, Howard Chaykin, Jose Luis Garcia Lopez, Louise and Walter Simonson, Klaus Janson, Lee Weeks, and dozens more. Terrificon also brings you the actors who have brought your favorite superheroes to life on the big and small screens. Michael Rooker, Charlie Cox, Star Trek actors Walter Koenig, Nana Visitor, Armin Shimmerman, Ethan Peck, Celia Rose Gooding, and many more. That's Terrificon, August 16th through the 18th. For information on tickets and guests, visit Terrificon.com. Welcome back, everybody. It's time again for Word Balloon, the comic book conversation show. John Suntress here. This is really great because Adam Phillips is a PR guy that back when I started Word Balloon was probably the first publicity guy that I dealt with as a podcaster. Welcome to the show, Adam.
Thanks, John. I appreciate you having me on.
No, it's my pleasure.
Now I want to go to Terrificon and also buy some Alex Ross comics, you know?
There you go. And maybe watch a Danny Thomas special or whatever.
Maybe. Yeah.
Honestly, man, I my viewers know and my listeners might know, I scour YouTube for those like Bob Hope variety specials and the other ones when they say so-and-so, such and such will not be on tonight. So that we may bring it and so truly, great. Man, I got Ironside. I got Chico and the Man.
That's awesome.
I figure we're close enough in age and everything that you know the references.
Definitely.
Yeah. Hilarious, man. So,
cool.
Man, 33 years in the comic publicity business?
Yeah, I've been in and out of comics. I've done other things in comics, too. Like I started out in editorial. My very first job, I hadn't even graduated college yet. I was an assistant editor at Marvel. Mostly working on Marvel Age magazine. And,
sure.
I was absolutely thrilled last year when they came out with the Marvel Age Omnibus, which is like the craziest thing I've ever seen. I hope they do another volume of it because the last issue in the first Omnibus is the first one that I was officially the assistant editor on. So it was so strange. It's like, who wants this? I don't know. I mean, aside from me and, other people who wrote it for it.
Well, I'm sure the Marvel Zombies, man. They love Ohatmu, and I know they love Marvel Age. I always see people posting pages or issue covers from on Facebook and the like. So yeah,
sure. Yeah, it was great to be there. Anyway, but I worked at Marvel for a few years. I worked and I did a lot of freelance work in and around Marvel and other publishers. Was in magazine publishing for a few years. And then sort of circled back around toward comics in the 90s. And I started DC Comics at late 1994. I was there for 26 years. And, man, I did everything. In fact, I just recently bought new copies of a couple of promotional mini comics that I wrote very early in my tenure at DC. They're not great.
What were they for?
The Dark Side of DC. If you remember when DC launched, it was Fate and a relaunch of Night Force, Scare Tactics. There was some other one. I don't remember. It was, DC Universe mystery heroes.
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
Like the people in Shadow Pact and the like, for instance, when
A little earlier than that, yeah. But yeah,
sure.
it was like 1996 or 7. So
Okay. Well,
sometime.
forgive me for the personal question, but
Oh, please.
what did you think of podcasting when it kind of hit the world? I know I started in
Well,
'05, so I
wow.
wasn't. Yeah, I'm an early adopter,
Yeah.
but certainly I would imagine I don't know how many years you were still doing PR and publicity where jerks
Yeah.
like me were bugging you for interviews.
I wasn't in publicity that long, a few years at DC. Mostly it was marketing. The first podcast I remember listening to was the official Lost podcast. And
Sure.
um, I didn't know what a podcast was at the time. I mean, it was just like this thing, but um, mostly at DC, like you had to be, certified or whatever to be allowed to talk publicly or be on a podcast or anything like that. So I didn't do them then. But after leaving DC a little over 4 years ago, I started one with my friend Car D'Angelo, owner of Earth 2 Comics. We
Oh,
were just chatting one day, and like I'm always looking for projects, and we were just chatting one day about how much we love the Defenders, and yeah, such a great series in so many ways.
oh
And
yeah.
we started looking around. It was like there's nothing out there about the Defenders, so we did, I don't know, 40 or 50 episodes of a Defenders dialogue podcast.
That's
And
fantastic. Did you
it was a
issue
lot of
by
fun. Yeah.
how'd you
Huh?
how'd you do it? Issue by issue? How'd you do
Yeah.
it?
Issue by issue. We could cover about 3 issues per episode because I wanted to talk about every little piece of minutia. And I did all the like editing and distribution. And I had another podcast at the same time that I was doing called One Shot Wonders. Um, and I probably did 20 or 30 episodes of that as well. And it was really weird because a lot of episodes I did solo
Okay.
would run like 15 minutes and I'd tightly script them. And then I had a couple of episodes where I had like Mark Wade on, who you just had recently, I believe.
Yes.
Fabian Nicieza was on, Fred Hembeck, and those would go well over an hour.
I get it, man.
Yeah.
You
But it
know,
was so much fun.
the supposedly the rule is, well, you don't want to do more than 20 or 40 minutes. And I don't know, man. I come from commercial radio,
Mm.
and it's like I always give that scenario of what if you manage to get George Lucas? And it's like, I got all afternoon. I got as much time as you want. And it's like, well, I
Yeah.
only want 20 or 40 minutes. No, man. I mean, good Lord, I do marathon conversations with Bendis and a lot of the writer and artist friends that I have. And yeah, man, it's like it's a conversation. Let it breathe.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I mean, Bendis would be a good person to, he knows how to talk.
Honestly, I over the years I gained Mark Wade's trust. And initially he was like, all right, well, let's not do more than 30 or 40 minutes. And through Art Baltazar and Franco, the Tiny Titans guys,
yes,
we became much better friends. And I think Mark has trusted me over the years. And now, God bless him, man. He, God, when the whole Wolverine thing, who created Wolverine controversy came up, I'm like, you want to talk? He's like, of course I do. And I'm like, great.
Yeah. That's terrific. Yeah. Art and Franco, another couple of good friends, they're awesome.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah. So, what I was going to say though is like since in the last few months I started or I've been working on a Substack newsletter called Untold Stories with Adam Phillips. I called it that because I'll go back for a second. When I left DC, I started a marketing concern, let's call it, called Untold Stories Marketing, and I thought I'd reuse that name over and over again until I drive it into the ground. So we're about 4 weeks into Untold Stories with Adam Phillips on Substack. And
what's the URL? I'm gonna put it underneath us so people know.
That's a great question. Tell you what, I will find it while we're talking.
All right.
And
Oh, good. I'm sorry. Yeah, please continue.
I'll paste it into the chat.
Okay.
They won't take long. But anyway, I've been basically the topic is, and the subtitle is comics, marketing, life, right? And I did a few episodes sort of about my career and who I am. And then I did one. I'm working on one. I did one today or this week that was about sort of the basic tools of marketing comics. And I've got a couple more coming out. And then I wrote something about variant covers, and the variant cover conundrum is what I'm calling it. And it turned out to be close to 2,000 words. So I broke it up into a few episodes. So that's the kind of thing that, you can always break things up, right, into pieces.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
So what? Tell me if you don't mind. I mean, as
please.
you know, I've got the URL there underneath, so people can check out adamsphillips.substack.com. And what would you say? What is your call on the variant cover world?
Well, I mean, I've talked to a lot of retailers over the years at DC and in more recent positions that I've been in. And at the end of the day, it's like, I don't have a solution. I don't have a, way forward, but it seems to be that retailers feel like variant covers make their lives difficult, but they also make them money. So they're kind of stuck with them to a large degree. And I mean, just in the last couple of weeks, I was traveling and I was in Buffalo, New York, and I went to this nice little store, Empire Comics, owned by a guy named Steve Rogers. Yeah, cool. Great, right? And he's a real good guy. He wasn't there that day, but I was talking to his partner, Heidi, and she just brought up variant covers and how, oh my gosh, when you're in a tiny little store, it makes life really challenging. And she loves them. She loves the choices and things. But at the end of the day, how do you deal with them?
Because you have to buy so many to qualify. You have to buy so many regular issues to qualify for those variants.
Well, some of them you do. I mean, usually most publishers offer 2 or 3 or 4 that you can just order as many as you want.
Oh, okay.
But there are also those ratio variants or incentive variants where, you have to buy 10 copies to get one of that one, or 100 copies combined of the other ones to get one of this one. It gets complicated fast.
Yeah, sometimes even like I know with Marvel, it would be like a different title to get a variant of, say, Wolverine cover and stuff. You got to buy, the Defenders. You got to buy so many issues of the Defenders and things. Yeah,
wow.
I mean, so I got to be honest, man. And I came from sports radio in the 90s, and there was such a glut of sports memorabilia that was made to be collectible, but really it wasn't. So I got to be. I mean, I always appreciate the art of variant covers, but I've never, I never was that kind of collector. And really, the glut of that 90s product really turned me off. I kind of checked out around the death of Aunt May and Spider-Man, and didn't come back until like 98 or 99 when Kevin Smith was doing Daredevil and Bendis was getting started with Ultimate Spider-Man, things like that. So that's kind of when I came back, because I'm like, I heard, hey, the writing's really good again. Come back. And I'm like, all right. And it is.
Yeah. I mean, no, there's so much good stuff out there. And that's actually something else I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to give you another link, by the way. I think the one I gave you was more like my backstage area.
Yeah, well, that's here. I did this instead.
Oh, there you go. Thanks.
AdamPhillipsEverybody.substack.com. There you go.
Yeah, there you go. So, there's a lot of titles out there. Retailers are having a hard time keeping up with them. And there are so many that are great. I mean, but it's almost impossible for them for retailers to stock everything, right? Especially when, if it's a mini series and somebody comes in and says, well, I'll check out the first issue, it's very hard to know how many copies you need on that second issue. A lot of publishers have done returnability on their first couple of issues to help the retailers find the ceiling of what they could sell. But even that's sort of a thing of the past at this point. There's not that many doing it anymore.
I hear you, man. And I also wonder where we are with the single issue, given the price points that we're dealing with. We're talking about $5 comics and even more sometimes if they have more than 20 pages. I remember talking to Dan Buckley in very early in Word Balloon's existence, and I'm like, really, $3 for a comic? I'm like, I mean, I was used to $2, and you have $20, so you can buy 10 comics.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. That math was always important to us growing up, right?
Yeah, you got to stack. You got to stack for your 20.
Yeah, I was really knocked out, by the way, by the first issues that came out last month from Ghost Machine. I don't know if you got to look at them.
Oh, yes.
I mean, they're $3.99 cardstock covers, and one of them, Rook, I guess it's called. I think it has a longer name than that. It was like 56 pages. It was extremely long story. So that's a good value. I don't know if they'll keep that up very long, but
no, I hear you, man. I had Brian Hitch on to talk about Redcoat.
Oh, great.
I had Jeff and Jason Fabik on together just to announce the line in their specific book. And
Nice.
Jeff, again, is, I lucked out at him, truly. I mean, really, from 05, as soon as I would have somebody on, and maybe because I had the radio background and I knew how to conduct an interview and stuff, I gained trust early. And one of the great things was people like Fletcher Chu Fong and Jan Jones seeing me like after my first Wizard in 05 as a podcaster, and coming back in 06, and they're like, "Oh, you're funny. You're the guy that makes fun of Dan DiDio." I would imitate him. I kind of give him a deeper voice, Jackie Mason, essentially. All right, let me tell you, I'm talking like this. This is my Dan DiDio.
That's pretty good. My Dan DiDio phrase is, "At the end of the day." It's always at the end of the day.
That's true. That's true. Hey, I always give Dan credit. That whole DC Nation idea of building community, it was the right idea at the right time, and it really, I think, showed DC can do it just like Marvel does.
Yes. I'm always happy to make fun of Dan, but I feel more comfortable doing it right now while he's in South Africa.
Yeah, he's he's great. I love Leilani. She's a wonderful woman as well.
Awesome.
And truly, again, I mean, having done this now for 19 years, it's like, hey, John, how are you? And I'm like, all right, great, man.
Yeah, definitely. And he's the world's biggest Sven Gulli fan, I think.
Absolutely. Goddamn, I was telling you, I've been doing Rich's panels for several years. And if Dan's in town, he's in the front row. And I'm like, that's awesome. He's like, I'm not here for you. I'm here for Rich. And I'm like, no, I don't.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, pretty neat. So I wanted to ask, it's funny, you teased me with some great names in the comic pantheon that you've had encounters with, and I would imagine some stories. Let's start with Steve.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to back up just for a second because I want to sort of plug a book I just read that made me think of me, which is that it's called Miss Odell. And I've been watching this YouTuber who talks about like classic albums and things. And on her wall, on her shelf behind her, she's got this book, Miss Odell. And I'm like, that's a George Harrison song. I know this. So I looked it up and I just read the book. And it's written by this woman, Chris Odell, who like in the late 1960s met Derek Taylor from Apple Records, got invited to just, visit in England, starts working for the Beatles, and then the Stones, and then Bob Dylan, and then Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. And she's just like a background person, but she's encountered all these people. And that's how I I'm reading this going like, this is like me, only, I'm less sexy. But, I've been really fortunate to have some great run-ins with people. And Ditko was a real strange one because, anything with Steve Ditko. Like, I know a lot of people like Mike Carlin or whoever who edited Steve Ditko on books and things like that. But when I was working at Marvel in the mid-1980s, Marvel was sending back all this artwork to people, that was like in their warehouse.
Sure.
But some of the local people would just come in and pick things up. So I happened to be hanging around the returns table in the Marvel offices the day Steve Ditko came in to pick up like a half dozen complete issues of Amazing Adult Fantasy, which is, a pretty big stack. And
that was the title before Amazing Fantasy.
Yes.
15.
And most of those issues,
Spider-Man, yeah.
Yeah, and most of those issues were wall to wall Stan Lee and Steve Ditko. Stan really, loved working with Steve on these little morality tales and things. And anyway, Ditko is he was perfectly friendly, but he was a little quiet. But he's sitting there, he starts flipping through all these pages that he hasn't seen in, I don't know, 30 or 40 years. And he's laughing and laughing and going, I can't believe I put so much work into this junk, on and on. And they're beautiful pages, of course, if you've ever seen that stuff. It's spectacular. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there's a great omnibus of it all, of the whole run.
Well, it wasn't called Marvel yet. Was it still Timely for Amazing Adult Fantasy or Atlas?
Atlas, I guess, yeah.
I had Michael Vasulo on, who's a historian.
Sure.
And they've been putting out a lot of the Atlas 50s product and everything. Interesting stuff.
I just saw that on the Free Comic Book Day issue that just came out, and I got very excited. I'm gonna have to see about getting some more of it. But sure, the thing I was going to say about Steve Ditko in that moment was that, at the time I thought like, oh, he just figured he probably is looking back and thinking like he was just as a young artist spending too much time on this stuff. He could have been getting more work done. But after reading about like his, whole objectivist philosophy, it's actually a philosophical point with him to put in as little work as possible to, for corporate comics. So he could spend all the time, as much time as possible on his personal stuff. So it was more of a philosophical point for him. So I thought that was amazing. Yeah.
What do you think? I mean, you've been in the business and you've observed how the creator-owned comic craze has increased, and we've seen things like Substack itself, not only kickstarting and using Image and other publishers, but also to really, just generate your own material, very DIY. So, what's your observations of these innovations?
Sure, I love it. I love. As much as I like all sorts of comics, usually I find, and this is, out of many, many years of reading stuff and talking to people and things, like the ones that tend to be one or two people cut closer to the bone, let's say. They're a little more personal, and they're more expressive of a single person's vision. So, there are so many great creators out there, though, and not, a lot of them. Like, it's always interesting to me when somebody like Chip Zdarsky, who writes a lot of comics, but he also draws sometimes. And when he draws the thing, when he draws something, I always find it more a little bit more interesting just to see like how he's going to express himself. So
that's interesting. Yeah. I'll tell you, him and Mark Russell. I saw Mark excited today about getting the X-Force gig and making the announcement. I'm so happy for both of those guys because I liked their creator-owned stuff for a long time. Yeah. And then all of a sudden, it's really great to see DC and Marvel get them. And Rob V is another guy like that. I think he's brilliant.
Three absolute tremendous talents. I'd love to meet. I don't know Chip. I don't know Rom, but I do know Mark a little bit. And I'd love to meet some of those guys, of course. Sure.
Do you travel beyond New York to go to conventions anymore or no?
Well, I'm in Los Angeles now.
Oh, excuse me.
Yeah, no problem. And sometimes it depends, really, if I can. We'll see what the future holds because right now, as I was mentioning, I left DC about 4 years ago. I worked with Dynamite for a bit. I worked with AWA for a bit. And right now I'm looking at some new possibilities and we'll see where they take me. I also do a lot of retailer meetings at conventions, but also the Comics Pro meetings, which the last couple of years have been in Pittsburgh.
Right.
And they've also done a bunch of meetings in Portland, Oregon, and other places. So, I'm a huge supporter of retailers. In fact, I need to make a call to the new president of Comics Pro. He and I have been going back and forth on Messenger and trying to find a time to talk. So,
well, again, your association with Earth too. I mean, you got a firsthand knowledge of how stores work. Are you also? Sure. Are you also? You mentioned when you first approached me of coming on, you're like, hey, you should have Tony Fleece on because of his.
Oh, right.
So yeah, are you working directly with creators on some books?
I'm doing that for Tony through my friend Timmy Heeg, who owns a store called Arsenal Comics in Ventura. He actually has 2 locations. One's in Ventura, California, and Timmy asked me if I could help out by trying to get Tony some, gigs. And it was funny that you said, we just had him.
Oh yeah. Well,
what are you going to do?
Yeah. Well, much like Chip and Mark, Tony was a message board friend on Brian Bendis's message board. And then he sent me his early comics. And yeah, we just hit it off at conventions and when he's in town. And yeah, he's become a real dear friend for over 10 years. So yeah, I mean, and as I always say, it's funny, Adam, because again, and I totally understood, but working at both places, DC was much more corporate and is much more corporate than Marvel. Things have loosened up. And I really want to stress this in case Michael Schelling or Clark Bull happen to check out my interview. But really, it was tough. And listen, I respected that because I remember asking for editors and you'd be like, can't get them. Sorry, they're not allowed to talk. And I understand that. But things have truly, I mean, to the point where literally Clark last week is like, hey, mentioning a creator. He's like, do you mind having him on? I'm like, no, that sounds great.
Oh, that's great.
So, yeah, thank God, 19 years, man. I think I'm finally injecting some trust. I got it from Marvel right away, and it probably was because of my friendship with Bendis that happened so quickly. And even when Jim McCann was the head publicity guy at Marvel, I mean, he's like, no, John knows what he's doing. Let John do interviews. I'm like,
yeah, for sure, definitely. Those are a bunch of great guys. I love Clark and I love Michael, and I'm always happy when I run into them. I think the last time I saw Clark at WonderCon for a little bit. So
nice,
great guy.
Sure.
Yeah,
that's cool. That's excellent. Yeah. I meant to ask when you said you were working on Marvel Age. Who was Milgram? Was Milgram the editor of Marvel Age?
No, Jim Salicrup.
Oh, I love Jim. Sure.
Oh yeah, he's the greatest. They can't all be the greatest, but he's the greatest.
No, but don't you find, Adam, real fast that a lot there maybe out of the 100% of creative people that work in the business, there's only like 97% of them are great. There's only about 3% of them are really not nice.
Yeah, absolutely. Jim edited Marvel Age from issue, I want to say 5 or 6 to about 105. He did the annuals and stuff. He was there a long time. He set the tone, and he was always back then. He was very inspired by a few things, including the Andy Warhol interview magazine. But it was like a Marvel Age issue had so much stuff packed into it, and I wrote about that a little bit in my Substack newsletter, where I kind of talk about thanks, man. There were some people who
the audience. I just put up the URL again. It's Adam Phillips at Substack. AdamPhillips.substack.com. 1 L in Phillips, everybody.
Yeah, thank you.
Continue, by all means.
That there were people who sort of complained about Marvel Age and the fact that they had to pay for what's basically promotional material, but at the same time, there was so much stuff packed in there, and things that you would be amazed by.
It was always cheaper than the regular.
It was absolutely, right? Yes,
like a quarter or 50 cents or something when books were over $1 or whatever.
Yeah, right. So, like for the fans, it was a great entertainment value, I think.
100%. And honestly, man, I bet you were like this too. Really, the inspiration for me doing Word Balloon was things like the Comics Journal and Amazing Heroes, David Anthony Kraft's Comics Interview.
Oh gosh, yes.
So I loved all that stuff, and I even to this day, and that's why I'm not surprised that Marvel put out the Marvel Age Omnibus. It's interesting reading this stuff and hearing what the creators were thinking as they were making this stuff. I mean, I'll every now and then go look for, a comics interview or an Amazing Heroes, and it's the Watchmen coverage. And there's Dave Gibbons and Alan Moore saying, this is what I'm thinking right now as we're making this thing.
Yeah. And it's interesting, like from a collector's point of view, that, we're in an age where people who really collect back issues are looking at things like, I can't remember exactly which book it was, but one of the Amazing Heroes or something where Watchmen first popped up as a promotional article or ad or something. It's like, that's the actual first appearance.
Yep.
And
of the Canadian, of Rorschach. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Man.
Yeah.
Those were exciting ads, man. I mean, my God, I was still in college back then. And I remember going to the store and going, what is this? And man, you had that great shot of the comedian with like a bazooka or whatever in a window, and you had that great alley shot of Rorschach, the back shot of Rorschach and everything. So and God, the Rolling Stone magazine where they interviewed Miller about Dark Knight. Yeah, man, I'm like, wait a minute, I just stopped reading comics. Maybe I should get back to it.
Yeah, not to brag, but I never stopped.
That's great, man. Hey, the only thing, economics is what kept me from really continuing.
I hear you. I was fortunate enough.
Post-college. Yeah, post-college in your 20s.
Oh, my gosh, yeah.
And now it's so funny, too, because I always direct people to their libraries, because now there are so many graphic novels, and the public libraries have them. And it's like, well, if you can't afford your habit anymore, there's good news, man. There are ways.
Yeah, sure. Which, probably like me, you looked in your local public library when you were a kid looking for, I read the Jules Pfeiffer book out of the library. And
the Peanuts collections that Schultz would put out. Yeah. Absolutely, man. No, great stuff.
No, the public library is a great resource. So when we moved to California, our house size decreased a fair amount, and I was like determined to not buy as many books that I've felt like I had to keep, not just comics, but like prose books or whatever. So I got my Kindle up and working about a year ago, and I've been borrowing stuff from the Libby app from the library because it's just easy. And anyway,
no, I think it's great.
My shelves are all full. I can't put any more books on them.
Honestly, man, I have the generous problem of when I meet creators at conventions. Oh, can I give you my book? And I'm like, please send me a PDF. I'm like, my bookcases are more than full, and I'm like, I really do want to read it, but yeah, that problem. What do you think of digital comics?
I mean, they're not the same, unfortunately, as regular ones. And I remember when DC first got into digital comics, and the retailers were the Zuda, yes, but I mean through Comixology and things like that.
Oh, sure, okay.
That retailers were very worried about it, and I mean it just never added up to the kind of sales that would really make a dent in print copy sales. So fortunately, that didn't end up hurting anyone really, as far as we can tell. But I mean, I read some digital comics occasionally. I was like when we were doing the Defenders Dialogue podcast, there were some issues that I didn't have, but I was able to find on Marvel Unlimited.
Sure.
So occasionally it's helpful.
Yeah, man. I had Dan Jurgens on a few months ago, and good Lord, almost 15 years ago, his run on Thor. I hadn't read it when it was first out. It was on Unlimited, and I'm like, oh, let me read this before I talk to Dan. Something we never talked about before.
Right.
So yeah,
right.
Oh, I think they're great. I have to confess, I haven't gone to DC Universe. It seemed a little more clunky.
Oh, really? I haven't even looked at it.
Yeah, I should try it. I should talk to the guys and see about getting. But I mean, they're great. Both companies are very generous, and I'm on their press lists.
Oh, cool.
So that really helps keep up, to date with stuff. And yeah.
Hey, so let me ask you a question. What, where do you shop in Chicago? You're in Chicago, right?
I'm very fortunate. I literally have two amazing shops that are like 10 minutes away from me in different directions. The Great Chicago Comics
Okay.
On Clark, blocks away from Wrigley Field.
Yes.
Amazing store. Wonderful, wonderful store. And then my good friends, Patrick and Dow.
Oh, yeah.
Comics.
And then Chicago Comics. Is that Eric?
Oh, God, I don't know any of the management guys' names.
Okay.
I have to confess. But they're great. They're both amazing.
Yeah. Pat and Dow are old buddies. They used to come to the retailer, the retailer meetings and things like that. And I always found them a lot of fun. So and they've been very encouraging to me in things I'm doing too.
Wonderful.
When I was at AWA, one of my jobs was calling retailers, and I talked to them a couple of times. And I always like talking to retailers and seeing what's going on in their stores. So
sure.
And they were very forthcoming.
Man, the retailers, I give them so much credit for surviving COVID. I mean,
oh my gosh,
not only digital comics, but really, I mean, the last 15 years they've really been put through the ringer in terms of the challenges keeping the lights on. So
unbelievably difficult times. And I mean, look, it's not a secret that Earth 2 Comics is, Eric, who I was talking about, is at Quimby's, excuse me, but also Chicago.
Oh, sure. So, I love Quimby's. I'm glad you mentioned Quimby's. That's a great, not only comics.
I've never been there, but
alt publishing.
Yeah.
A lot of zines, a lot of really, I mean, and you said you were in magazines for a minute. And I lament the fall of magazines because I was always a magazine buyer. Yeah.
Yeah. What was I saying? All right. Earth 2. They used to have 2 stores. One was very close to me, but it was also very reliant on foot traffic from the local college. And so, when they stopped having in-person classes, their business fell off dramatically.
Oh, wow.
That location closed. And now they're about to close the other location just because, rents keep going up. The quality of the sort of surrounding stores where they are in Sherman Oaks has gone way downhill. I mean, to the point where there was a restaurant on one side that had a fire. Then there was another fire on the other side. And they were just really lucky to get out with with their heads on. So they're closing down. They're going to continue doing online sales and different things. Wow. But it's a end of an era in a lot of ways. So it's really too bad. Fortunately, Los Angeles has a really vibrant comics retail community, and there's a ton of great stores around, like Collector's Paradise and Galaxy of Comics and so many others.
Is Golden Apple still running?
Golden Apple is great too. They're a little further from me personally, but terrific store, and I'm a big fan of Ryan.
That's my frustration with LA. I always love going there, but it's such a spread out city, and my God, I'm used to New York and Chicago, where everything's kind of right there, smushed together and everything.
Yeah, it's true. It's very different. I mean, I lived in New Jersey, and went into New York for work for most of my adult life up till 2015, and this is a very different experience. I love it, but it's not.
Did you make the move when DC went to the West Coast? That's what I figured. Sure. Yeah. Well, and I knew guys like Will Dennis that didn't make the move, and that's when he left DC.
Yeah, right. Matt Idelson.
Sure.
Who's now a Dynamite. He had the same situation.
I used to see Will at the cons when he was still at Vertigo, and he's like, "Hey, I really love the show," and I'm like, "There's going to be a day, man, when you are not working at Vertigo anymore, and you got to promise me you will sit down and talk to me." And he has. So,
good.
Yeah. Well, again, man, like you said, I've been lucky. Everyone's been really nice.
Yeah. So, you promised the people some other stories.
Yeah, man. Yes.
I don't want to leave them off the list, but no. I went to School of Visual Arts, which I went in wanting to draw comic books, and I came out wanting to write about comic books. But I took Will Eisner's class there for several years.
Wow.
And the Will Eisner thing I wanted to mention was that the way his class was structured would be like the first hour would be a lecture about comic book storytelling, which would just blow your mind. And then he would give you give the class an assignment, and then the rest of the class, the rest of the time, which would be like another hour or something, he'd be looking at some of the students' work, and everyone else would sort of break up into groups, and we'd just chat amongst ourselves and look at each other's work and talk about it. And I don't know how or why, but at one time he came in with the complete pencil layout with script for his graphic novel, A Life Force, which I'm sure you're familiar with, all his graphic novels. That may be one of the very best ones. And he hands it to me and says, "Could you read this for me? I'd love to know what you think of it."
Wow.
I never found out exactly why, but I assume he gave it to me. But I assume it's because I wouldn't shut up in the class talking about what I thought of everyone's work, which is a problem, or possibly a plus that I've had all my life. I've always had a lot of opinions. So I sat there and I read it through the rest of the class. And of course I was completely blown away and didn't know what to say, because I just get, "It's really good, Mr. Eisner." What are you going to say? And of course, the book came out and it was just like it. He didn't have to change anything.
That's excellent. No, I admire the hell out of him. I met him in 2000 or 2001. He was at the University of Chicago for a humanities weekend. And Neil Gaiman interviewed him on stage, and it was a very academic setting. So after it was almost like a lecture. And afterwards, they were all just in the lobby, and you could walk up and talk to him. And I had brought several Warren spirits for him to sign.
Nice.
He was thrilled. He's like, "Oh, this is great." And I'm like, "Hey, man, that's so long I've been a fan." Absolutely.
Yeah. So, I think that's more or less the first stuff I read of his too, was one of the Warren spirits. And then I just kept getting the rest of the series. It was such a great thing that they brought them back in the 70s like that, and kept the, some kind of awareness of everything he did on the spirit, because there was nothing like it before or since.
I so agree, man. He's like our Walt Disney.
In a lot of ways, yeah.
He just his art was so lush, and those stories were really just beautiful stories. No, I have Jim Warren's the biography that Fantagraphics.
Oh, it's great.
Yes, and I don't remember. Now it's going to make me after this talk. I'm going to get up and go to my bookshelf and see what he had to say about reprinting the spirit stuff. But yeah, it was, oh my God, among my favorites of what Warren put out.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I love those biographies that Bill Shelley was able to put out. I wish he could have kept going. I feel so bad that Yeah,
I read his Otto Binder, and I read
the Kurtzman.
The Kurtz one, absolutely. I had Bill on the show. These were the guys that inspired me. Guys like Bill. So no, absolutely, man.
Yeah, for sure.
So did you ever want to work for those comic critique magazines like Amazing Heroes and Comics Journal and the like?
I did actually write a couple of things for Comics Journal. In fact, I just dug up my one copy of the very first one I wrote for earlier, because I was sending messages back and forth with Mike Pellerito from Archie.
Sure.
And I told him about this before, but the very first thing I had published pretty much that had anything to do with comics was an article in the Comics Journal about Archie Comics. Because back in the early 80s, so when I started college, I went to Syracuse University for a couple of years, partly because they had a comics club. And two of the people in the comics club were Kurt Busiek and Scott McCloud, who are lifelong friends.
Nice.
And Kurt and I shared an apartment. I shared an apartment with Scott for like a year, and then I shared an apartment with Kurt for several years. And we were collecting all sorts of things, and I collected a lot of back issue Archie comics and really got into it. So that's why I wanted to write this article, long story short. And I wrote like one or two other things for the Comics Journal, but I didn't love it, and I was already writing for Marvel Age at that point, so I kind of let the Comics Journal thing go. But it was funny because I looked at that issue. It's got Chris Claremont on the cover, a Kevin Nolan drawing of Chris Claremont, not a flattering one.
Not a flattering one. Okay.
No. And there's a big article in there by my pal Heidi McDonald about the X-Men.
What about Heidi and the X-Men? That's interesting. Did she write it?
Yeah, she wrote this article about how her opinion at the time was Chris Claremont does not understand women. Essentially, I think that was the thesis. But she wrote a lot of stuff for a Comics Journal anyway. But I was amazed to see, because we're still good friends, that we were in the same magazine at the beginning of our respective careers.
That's great, man.
Yeah,
no, I was when the internet happened. The Beat was one of my destinations, and she and Jen Contino were co-running the thing.
Right.
And,
when they started it. Yeah.
Newsarama as well. For a while, Word Balloon was associated with Newsarama, and they would pay me to post
cool.
there early on. Yeah, that helped me get a lot of a lot of ears on what I was doing. That and Bendis, honestly, Brian was a wonderful advocate, and really through his message boards and stuff, and a lot of his friends like Fraction and Dave Mack and Mike Oming and everybody. Yeah, they kind of came to trust me. So
nice. Yeah. Very cool.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
How about Romita Sr.?
Oh, right. So he was, the art director at Marvel, as you know, and he had his own little office, and he was like the only guy in the place who wasn't the vice president but was wearing a tie. And it was always, the only thing I was saying about him, I guess, the only thing I was thinking about him, which I've been thinking lately, is that even though we had very different backgrounds or whatever, he always reminded me of my dad. Because when you'd go into John Romita's office, he would be listening to WNEW AM, which back in the day was like they play a lot of crooners, a lot of big band music and stuff like that, which I guess is, and my dad loved that stuff too, so I always felt comfortable going in there.
Am I right? William B. William, wasn't he one of the DJs? Yep.
Who was comic book star William B. Williams.
What was his connection to comics? I didn't remember.
Oh, there's a Batman or a detective issue where he's on the cover, and it's like the mystery of, well, I forget what it is exactly, but like Robin's saying something like, Batman, we've got to go. There's an emergency or something, and he's like, first I got to listen to William B. Williams on the radio or something. I don't know.
Outstanding. That's and honestly, man, I'm so glad you mentioned this, because I always say about the Mort Weisinger Superman era, because people are like, well, those goofy covers. It's like Superman was a pop culture magazine reflecting the times of the day. And that's why Alan Funt is on a cover. That's why there's the Jimmy Olsen Caveman Beetle cover. I'm like, or even in Marvel, that you would have Fantastic Four, and all of a sudden there's the cast of Gunsmoke or whatever.
For sure. Wasn't it, Amazing Spider-Man, where Aunt May had to run home to watch the Beverly Hillbillies or something?
Oh, I didn't remember that, but that's fantastic. Well, the Batman cover you described, it reminds me of that 60s cover that I think Infantino did, where Batman is in the Batcave watching the Adam West show. There's a cover screen. All they have is the logo, but he's like, in a second, Robin, I got to watch this show first and everything. It's fantastic.
Okay, I think I was conflating a couple of different Batman covers, because here it is, Detective Comics number 357, and Batman, Robin, and Bruce Wayne and Dick Grayson are all sitting around a table, and in the middle, at the head of the table, is William B. Williams, and he's saying, "Good evening, world. This is William B. Williams. My guests are Batman and Robin, Bruce Wayne and Dick Grayson. They're going to reveal something tonight that will electrify you. Get ready for a shock." So they don't even say who he is exactly. They just expected people to know.
Hilarious. Well, again, New York. I mean, it's New York, so it was a big deal, and I get it. I get it. That's fantastic.
I had a conversation on, I guess, Facebook a few years ago, where I was asking Paul Levitz and Michael Uslan, and Alan Brennert got in the conversation as well, about what was the connection between DC Comics and Palisades Amusement Park.
Yes, I remember those ads. Absolutely.
Those ads, and there were also several covers where they were references to Palisades Amusement Park buried in the backgrounds and things. And Alan knew that. Well, Alan knew the most about it because he actually has written a terrific book that came out a few years ago about that takes place. It's called Palisades Amusement Park or Palisades Park, but it's a novel that takes place over many years at Palisades Amusement Park and sort of deals with, the racism that was going on there because. Yeah, it's a really good book, and it really brought up a lot of memories because I went there as a kid in the early 70s, and I think it closed down in like 72 or 73.
Oh, wow.
Anyway, he sort of said, well, he sort of thought it had to do with, Palisades Amusement Park's ties to like mobsters and the distribution network. Also being sort of related. Anyway, it was not a very clear answer. Ultimately, we were just all guessing.
Interesting.
But it was an interesting topic of one of those weird little corners of comics that you just have to go, what is happening here?
Well, again, and unfortunately, he's had a lot of personal troubles, but Gerard Jones' Men of Tomorrow book, I think, really laid out a lot of the mob connections to certainly early periodicals and the guys like Field and the rest that were running DC. And Jack Leibowitz, absolutely, man. So you and I'm glad you mentioned Paul, because I did want to ask, you really were there for both Levitz's run as publisher and then also Dan's run as publisher, Didio.
Yeah.
Tell me the differences of working for both guys.
That's an interesting comparison to make. So, Paul knows everything and Dan knows a lot. But I mean, Paul had been there since he was a teenager. And even though he went to college and learned so much else about the world and about how to run a company, he started in editorial, he moved into finance, he moved into being the publisher, but he knew how to do every job at the company almost. So if he looked over your shoulder, you knew he was going to tell you how to fix things or do things differently or whatever. Sorry, cat just jumping into the room.
Oh,
and Dan was more freewheeling, I would say. And he was much more focused on editorial, which was his background, But I mean, he was co-publisher, of course, with Jim Lee. So,
correct.
They both had their areas of responsibility, and at the end of the day, they all shared the financial responsibilities for the companies. So, they covered very similar territory.
What was Jim like then in that capacity as well? I mean, I also thought of Dan when he was executive editor and all that prior to being co-publisher.
Sure.
But no, talk about Jim.
Well, Jim is always super great to work with. Very, very professional. Very, focused. Man, was he focused? I have a few little sketchy things that he drew that he sort of left in conference rooms that I took.
That's great, man. Go on.
I can't resist making stuff like that. I have a couple of drawings like that. I have actually from a year that Paul was at the Eisner Awards with me. I used to be like the Eisner Awards guy at DC for many years, and
gathering the nominee stuff. I mean, what'd you do in that capacity?
Sure. Well, I would work with the editors and figure out like what we were going to submit to the Eisner Awards, and make sure that people were invited and were going to show up on time and that they knew where to go. And I always loved being there not only because it was great to see people like, get, like lifetime achievement awards and things like that. But also I would sit there and write down like, okay, that looks really fascinating. I'm going to go look for that tomorrow on the show floor at San Diego. Anyway, Paul was doodling on a program and he left it behind. So I have that.
Paul or Jim?
Paul Levitz.
Oh, Levitz was doodling. Go on.
Yeah. And I remember him telling me once I asked him, I think it was around the time that DC was doing the September 11th tribute book. Yep. I asked him, Paul, do you ever, I know you're writing some stuff for this. "Do you ever draw anything?" And he said the only thing he ever draws is schnauzers. So sure enough, on the Eisner program book, he drew like 3 drawings of schnauzers.
Hilarious.
I was just like, I got to keep this.
I didn't know until I saw evidence of it that Jeff Johns is a good amateur artist.
Yeah.
And he really is, you know. So, yeah, I don't know if you've seen examples of that as well.
I seem to remember him drawing a few things for like a Who's Who, or no, it was like a Secret Files, I think.
Oh, sure.
Like a couple of sort of profile page pictures.
Interesting. Wow. Those would be cool to look up and what characters he did. I got to remember to ask him about that next time I talk to him.
I think that's what I remember. You know, I can't swear to it. But yeah, he's a lot of these guys have, you know, their hidden talents that it's like, it's hard to make a go of being a professional artist. And a lot of people end up deciding that they'd rather write, myself included, even though I really haven't written many comics. You know, Len Wein was an artist first, and Steve Englehart.
Did not know that. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
I love both of those guys. Absolutely.
Yeah,
man.
Sure.
I was talking to Brian Azzarello last night, and he had reminded me that he was a fine art painter, and that's what he trained to do before becoming an artist. And he's like, "There's no way in hell I could have done sequential art. No way in hell." Mm-hmm. So,
yeah, it's so hard. Of course, being a fine artist is a pretty tough road to hoe as well.
Sure.
So, yeah.
So, what other icons do you have a couple stories of?
Oh man, I tell you, I mentioned that I, you know, shared a place with Kurt Busiek for a few years, and in the mid '80s, he was going up to DC Comics once in a while to pitch stories to people like Alan Gold. I think was one of the early editors who wanted to, you know, get work from him. And a couple of times I went up with him just because he was like, "You want to go?" I said, "Sure, I'll go."
Sure.
And I ended up talking to people like Andy Helfer and Bob Greenberger. And there was one time I was in the hallway talking to Bob Greenberger. Some guy comes rushing through the hall, shoves me out of the way, and keeps going. And I'm like, what the hell is that? And Greenberger says, "Oh, that was Kanigher."
Wow, Bob Kanigher, everybody.
So that was my one encounter with Bob Kanigher.
Hilarious. That's exactly.
I thought that was so funny. But I got to hang out. You know, one thing I used to like to do at conventions when I was there for DC was when some of the guys would do signings, and you know, they'd have an initial rush of people, but they wouldn't. It wouldn't keep going very long. So I would just hang out with them and chat.
Sure.
And I got to spend like a couple of hours here and there with Keith Giffen, Joe Kubert, a lot of different people. Joe Kubert was really interesting. And we talked about, you know, his sort of legacy and how proud he is of his sons in the industry. And we talked about Kanigher too, as a matter of fact. I think I probably told him that story. And he was like, "Yeah, that's, you know, that was Bob."
Outstanding, man. Yeah, the Palmiotti and Amanda were very kind and introduced me to Joe. And I had, when I was in high school, I interviewed Norman Mauer because of his association with Three Stooges. Mm-hmm. And, you know, he was Moe's son-in-law and became their producer for their last active years for about 15 years or so.
Yep.
And I didn't know at the time that Norman and Joe were collaborators at St. John's and their 50s comics, their 3D comics and the like. And I said, "Oh man, what a missed opportunity. If I knew then what I know now, I would have asked him so much more about his comics." But yeah, Joe was great. And he told me stories about Norman. It was just wonderful. So yeah, great.
Yeah.
Sweet guy. Yeah. Really cool guy.
Yeah. I go back an incredibly long way with Amanda Connor as well. So I shared this apartment, like I said, with Busiek, and then we had to move. The landlord just decided he didn't want to rent anymore, so we were going to move, and we ended up in Stamford, Connecticut. And the comic shop nearest us, Amanda Connor was working behind the counter as a kid before she even went to the Kubert school, you know.
That's
And
great.
the other person I met that way when I even before that, I guess it was like 1983, and I was living in that apartment with Scott McCloud, and we were on the it was East 82nd Street, and right around the corner there were like 3 different comic shops, one of which was called Action Comics, and behind the counter there, Scott Dunbeer.
Oh, that's great. I love Scott. Great guy.
Yeah. So we became good friends. We sort of bonded over our love and respect of Alex Toth and people like that, Dan DiCarlo, you know.
I'm keeping my eyes peeled. I know he's teasing. He's got a big announcement coming.
Yeah, I can't wait to hear what it is.
Me neither, man. Absolutely. It's funny you mentioned Amanda, and I don't know why. And I meant to ask you this earlier. How about Jeanette Kahn? Did you have any encounters with Jeanette?
Yeah, yes. So early in my career at DC, I was in what was then called the Creative Services Department, and we would do special projects of all kinds, you know. And I got to work with her on a.
If I may, real fast, I want to describe Creative Services. That's like that you'd make a special comic for the American Dental Association or some group like that. Am I right?
That would be one thing. Yeah. All the trading cards were run out of that department, and a lot of other stuff. I mean, I did like brochures and pamphlets and sales kits for different departments, things like that.
Okay.
And I got to work with Jeanette on the Christmas card for DC like 3 or 4 years running, which was a lot of fun. But the weirdest thing I had to work with her on was a birthday card for Shaquille O'Neal that she wanted me to get Angelo Torres to draw.
Wow.
Excuse me.
Yeah. Wow.
So we've somewhere in the world, there's a picture of a drawing of by Angelo Torres of Shaquille O'Neal riding on the back of Superman as he's flying. I don't know why that was the thing. And the other weird thing was like he drew Shaquille with doing an okay sign, but he did it like this. And then they had to like, wait a minute, that's not what this is the thing. It was very odd. It was just like a weird mistake that he made.
Well, I'm not surprised because I know Shaq has the Superman tattoo.
Yes.
And whenever you saw tours of his house, there's like tons of Superman iconography all over the place.
Yeah.
And I'll forgive him Steel the movie, given how much he loved Superman and stuff. I love
for
Superman.
sure.
It's okay. That's so
Jeanette,
funny.
Yeah, Jeanette was always a delight to work with, and super, super, super stylish. Like she always wore, you know, very vibrant, super bright clothes and things like that. And her office was like that too. It was just like a pop art museum almost.
That's really great.
Yeah.
I have so much respect for her. I mean, I was literally a grade school kid reading Dynamite magazine when she was making it.
Yes.
And it's not, I mean, and I learned the origins of how she connected with DC. And it was such a brilliant move by them to hire this young 20-something woman to run DC. And good Lord,
really shake it up.
Yeah, I was there for all those innovations and the DC explosion. Sadly, also the DC implosion. But it was really an exciting time for DC.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, she and Paul, you know, pioneered so many practices that we take for granted now in terms of returning artwork and the kind of reprint payments and royalties and things like that. Really important to the industry as a whole.
What do you think of the product as far as television and film that the big two have been playing with for the last 25 years?
Some of it's great. You know, I enjoy it. I will say, I kind of wish that some of the filmmakers, didn't feel the need to reinvent things that are already there. And you're seeing that, I think, with some of the newer material, the newer releases in the last 3 to 5 years, let's say, where instead of using one of 1,000 villains that exist already in the comics, they decide to invent somebody new. But, you know, it's great that it's all out there. I kind of wish there were more calls to action to like go buy a comic book.
You know, you and I grew up with the reruns, the George Reeves reruns, right at the
Yeah.
end of the Adventures of Superman. Superman appears monthly in Action Comics and Superman magazine, and it's
Right.
like, and again, the only reason why, and people may not know this, but DC National itself produced that show, so they
Yes.
were, they were directly like, all right, hey man, let's sell the magazine while we're selling the TV show. It was a great thing, and it is so strange that these conglomerates that now own these publishers don't see the need to have just a quick 10-second thing. I was really glad during the New 52, the amount of advertising that DC did on. I was watching BBC America, and there's a commercial for DC in the New 52, for example.
Yeah, I mean they're doing a little better at it, but there have been a lot of times where Warner Brothers has said, all right, we're going to make sure that Warner Brothers Films and DC Comics are working together closely. And I mean, I would love to see it happen, but it's still not really happening as much as they want it to. I don't know why.
I always give the metaphor. It's like the conglomerate is a suit of clothes, and the pants don't know what the suit jacket is doing. And it's like, you're part of the same suit. I don't get it. I don't understand why there isn't more coordination. And it was interesting. I remember, oh God, I can't think of his last name. You probably will remember. He was a DC guy, John, marketing guy. Oh God, really smart guy, came from TV. And he said Disney and Marvel are much more vertically inclined to work together than at the time. And this was even during the time John Rood.
Yes.
A great guy. Man, I'm telling you.
Terrific guy. Yes.
Tremendous guy. And was so kind to me in terms of like kind of an after hours conversation of, all right, this is how the Warner Brothers structure works. And this is what it is. And this is during DC Nation on Cartoon Network. And I'm like, what the hell, man? I'm like, you guys have this great animation product and you've got a 24-hour network that's running cartoons. I'm like, can't you guys get a bit more? And he's like, well, let me tell you how it works over at Warner's. I'm like, all right.
Yeah, he used to be my department head.
Oh, there you go, man. Great guy. Great guy. I don't know where he is, but tremendous guy.
I think at Disney, I'm not
sure. Oh, no kidding. That's cool.
Yeah. He was at Disney before, I believe. I should check in with him actually, but I see him pop up every once in a while on LinkedIn mostly.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. I'm so bad at LinkedIn, and I should probably be there more.
Well, there's nothing like being out of work that will help you use LinkedIn more.
Adam, believe me, man, I had 30 great years in Chicago radio. I don't regret a minute of it. And COVID hit, and I got downsized, and I've been struggling since in terms of trying to get back into broadcasting. Thank God the podcast is doing okay and
that's
providing
good.
Income and a platform to do what I do. Yeah, man. No, so I feel for you, man. Absolutely.
Sure. Well, I've got a couple of good possibilities that I can't talk about yet, but I might know things in any time from a week from now to a month from now. Who knows?
Well, good luck with that.
Keep my fingers crossed. Yeah, I appreciate it.
Hey, man, seriously, and I don't know. Are you thinking about doing a new podcast then?
Yes. My buddy who I mentioned earlier, Cardi Angelo, and I are talking about doing a new one, which is going to be more general comic stuff. And we had some ideas about topics. As an example, we're thinking of calling it Carr and Adams Comics and Stories, because believe it or not, there's nothing out there called like comics and stories in the podcast space. And we thought that was a good sounding title, but he wants to do a thing about imaginary stories, and in particular, whatever happened to the Man of Steel, which I thought was great.
Lovely story, one of
incredible story. Yes,
yeah.
One topic I've got a list of topics somewhere, but I haven't looked at them in a few months. But one thing I had in mind was, which Marvel series from the 1960s is the worst, and why is it Ant-Man? So we're just gonna have fun because when we start talking, it's like it'll just.
That's great, man. No, I love all of that. God, to me, this literally one of the saddest images was the end of the first issue of whatever happened to Man of Steel after Supergirl and the Legion visit him, and of course this is post-crisis. So and they leave, and he's just got his head buried in his hands. And Crypto, God bless Crypto, he's just being that faithful dog, knowing that his master is upset and just looking on as he's crying in his hands. Oh, good Lord.
Mm-hmm.
The Gaiman Kid Crusader story, I got to say, was not as great as Moore's story. I have to.
Unfortunately, it wasn't.
And Neil's brilliant. Don't get me wrong.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
It's all right. He's got nothing to apologize for. He's an amazing writer.
No, that's absolutely true.
And a wonderful guy, an advocate of nerd genre things in general. I mean, you could have somebody as literate and brilliant as Neil that is so willing to talk about everything, not only his own stories, but just nerd culture in general.
Yeah, it's true. And there are lots of other things. I mean, I love these strange comics. There was a Superman comic. I wish I could remember the name of it. Some fans did it and made it in England, and I managed to get a copy of it. And it was done about 10 years ago, I think. But it's like this very emotional sort of Superman story, but it was completely done by amateurs, and somehow they got away with it. And it's like a Superman searching for meaning in life and things. It was really fascinating.
That's cool.
I wish I could find the name of it, but it's sitting on my shelf.
I don't know how many interactions over these you've had with Paul Kupperberg, but
I love Paul.
Yeah, I'm so glad he is pack rat when it comes to hanging on to stuff, and he had all that great, the annuals they would do for British comics that would also include prose stories that were written by eventually big creators and stuff before they hit comics specifically, but they were writing prose short stories of the characters.
Yeah. Did you see Paul also pointed out, which is something fascinating I didn't know about just a few weeks ago, in the early 80s, he and a bunch of other people wrote and produced all sorts of Superman comics for the overseas market that never saw print in the United States.
Yes, and that's what I'm talking about. Stuff like that. Absolutely. Yeah. And good Lord, DC should publish that stuff.
Well, I was just talking to a friend at DC about it the other day, and I mean, I knew the problems there, and he had the same response, which is that they're almost certainly in whatever Scandinavian language or what have you. They'd all have to be translated back.
Sure.
And God only knows where the film is, and it's just a lot of work. But who knows? Maybe it's out there. I would love to see it.
Yeah, I would love to see it too. And it bummed me out. Paul was telling me, and I think he made it public enough that I can tell the story. He was trying to get the Jerry Lewis comics republished, and it was actually Lewis's estate that's like, no, that's okay. And it's like, oh man, that's a shame, man.
Yeah, that really is. Some of those are pretty terrific.
And Neil Adams drawing a lot of those and things,
Yeah, I think about 3 issues, to tell you the truth.
But
it's enough.
Yeah, because honestly, I thought he did more. Because I remember one of my first conversations with him was I liked doing the humor book. I liked doing the humor books.
Yeah,
because it also showed a different side of him. Because it was, as he described it, Bigfoot comics as opposed to Littlefoot comics. Bigfoot meaning more cartoon.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, because DC had a lot of licensed titles back then, and if you picked the right one, where you had somebody who controlled the rights and was willing to do it, then you'd have something to show the other people to say, like, look, it would look like this, and maybe they'd go for it. But I don't know who that would be.
I hear you, man. No, the Bob Hope comic lasted beyond its relevance.
Yeah, boy, did it.
But also, I am fascinated by that period in the 40s and 50s where they would license radio shows like Mr. District Attorney, which was a big radio show in its day. and that had a comic. And I want to say Gangbusters was also
a
comic.
Yeah,
interesting time.
Cowboy star Jimmy Wakely. I always like this one because
I never knew who Jimmy Wakely was. That's amazing, hilarious.
Yeah, the story is that Julie Schwartz got assigned to. Am I allowed to swear on this?
Of course you are. Yes, you are.
Julie Schwartz got assigned to edit the Jimmy Wakely comic, and his response was, "Who the fuck is Jimmy Wakely?" And we're still saying that to this day. Nobody knows.
That's fantastic. You're gonna make the fans all look up Jimmy Wakely. Oh my god, that's hilarious.
Yeah.
I've not, well, again, it's funny. The other night I did me and my friend Gabriel Hardman and Ian Brill, we all did a review of the terrible late 70s movie Convoy that Sam Peckinpah made.
Oh, sure.
And yeah, exactly. We were kids when that came out, but also
I don't think I saw it, but
I've never seen it either. But I was curious about it, and it really kind of helped nearly end Peckinpah's directing career. But in 1960, he created a Western that only ran half a season with Brian Keith from Family Affair and The Parent Trap, and it was called Westerner. And it's one of the most violent, bleak Westerns I've ever seen on TV. You can watch every episode on YouTube. But really, that's Gabe and I ended up spending just as much time talking about that as we did with Convoy. And it's fascinating. Really interesting show.
That is interesting, yeah.
So just like Jimmy Wakely, certainly Brian Keith, much bigger career, but yeah.
Yeah, really. Well, those shows that don't last long sometimes can be pretty interesting. I'll have to look for it. It's probably on Tubi or something because
it's on YouTube. All 13 episodes.
Or YouTube. That was what I was going to say next.
So yeah, man. Oh no, I love Tubi. I love Tubi. Go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, I was just going to say I just saw something the other day. I see a lot of things on the former Twitter where people are asking like, "What's your favorite movie?" Hat in a movie, like what's the most iconic hat? And people are saying, Indiana Jones or this or that or the other. And then somebody pointed out that there's a movie from I think 1954 starring Charlton Heston called Secrets of the Incas, and he showed an image. The guy who posted this showed like the movie poster, and Charlton Heston looks exactly like Indiana Jones.
Fantastic.
And the guy says, "Oh yeah, they stole Lucas and Spielberg stole everything from this movie, including the look."
Well, we got to ask Jim Steranko because he did that conceptual art for them.
Well, that's a good point. Yeah. Anyway, but that movie's on YouTube, so I'm like, I have to check this out. Sometime.
Oh, that's fantastic! Oh my god, yeah, man.
Secrets of the Incas.
Secrets of the Incas, everybody, because I always point to Stuart Granger in King Solomon's Mines.
Oh, okay, sure.
So yeah,
cool,
man. Adam, this has been great. Seriously, I'm so glad. Thank you for tapping me on the shoulder virtually and saying, "Hey, you want to talk?" I'm thrilled. Please keep me posted on what you're doing. Here, I'm gonna put the Substack URL back up. It's all one word. Adam Phillips with one L in Phillips.substack.com for the audio audience. And no, man, great stories. And yeah, stay in touch, man. Let me know what's going on.
I will.
When the new podcast is ready, I'm happy to help you promote it. So
fantastic. I appreciate it, John. It's been a lot of fun. Have a great night, okay?
You too, man. Thank you very much. Adam Phillips, everybody. It's 50-50 if we're going to do a review of Star Trek Discovery this week. If not, we'll do it early next week. But until next time, everybody stay safe, stay happy, stay healthy.